Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. Today is Humanitarian Day, a day to celebrate being a humanitarian, being the activist who fights for human rights. The person who is outspoken in a community when somebody's rights are trampled upon, and the person who will defend those in need when something is just gone wrong and the person's in trouble because their rights just aren't being met, either because of a broken law, broken bylaw, or the community just isn't willing to otherwise help. And there's a lot of people who out there claim to be that. They claim to want to be out there helping people with their rights, helping people live better because they're supporting equality and helping everyone find what should be equality. Now, that all sounds well and good, but there are people out there who still point the finger. I don't want those people living in my neighborhood. Not in my neighborhood. All those sort of things is okay as long as they have to travel to those who are in need or in help. But the second somebody like that lives in their own neighborhood, they become offended. That, oh, my neighborhood is no longer safe. That person needs help. They need assistance. That, whatever it could be. In one case in particular, it came up around a addiction or mental health, that they were all for having a free and clean safe drug site, that they should exist until the point that one was going to pop up in their neighborhood because there was a need. It turned out that there was a need in their neighborhood. Now they're offended. Now, instead of being all on board with it, that's not safe, I can't have that near me. Well, that's no longer being a humanitarian. That's no longer fighting for. He spoke with some of the port workers around what is happening with the port and getting the grain moved to where it needs to be to support those around the world who need the grain for food, and so that it can be found equally on markets so that it can be bought by different organizations and distributed to the countries that actually need it. Along with that, there's going to be more talk about Afghanistan and human rights issues that are happening, and there's things that the Taliban said that they would actually do, and are they falling short on those things? So there'll be questions asked about that in a press press briefing and update from the United Nations. They also update on some of the things that are happening in the occupied Palestinian territories, and are the agreements and everything being met, as well as they're going to talk about the World Food Program and the Horn of Africa. There will be some talk about emergency relief in Somalia, something around the relief mission has reached $10 million, and some talk around Zambia, Haiti, Ebola, Nicaragua, and other issues around the world. So let's move forward and listen to what actually was said in the press briefing and what the Secretary General actually said about Humanitarian Day.
There is a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to support people living through a humanitarian crisis. This village includes affected people who are always first to respond when disasters strike. Neighbors helping neighbors. It includes a global community pulling together to support them as they recover and rebuild. And it includes hundreds of thousands of individual humanitarians, volunteers and professionals alike, delivering healthcare and education, food and water, shelter and protection, help and hope. Far from the spotlight and out of the headlines, humanitarians work around the clock to make our world a better place. Against incredible odds, often at great personal risk, they is suffering in some of the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Today, the number of people who need humanitarian assistance has never been higher because of conflicts, climate change, COVID-19, poverty, hunger, and unprecedented levels of displacement. On this year's World Humanitarian Day, we celebrate humanitarians everywhere. We salute their dedication and courage and pay tribute to those who lost their lives in pursuit of this noble cause. They represent the best of humanity.
I'd like to emphasize that initiative is working, and I hope that volumes will be increased in several next weeks, and we will reach our initial aims: export of at least 3 million tons per month and up to 5 million in separate months. So again, I'd like to emphasize the role of Secretary General António Guterres and President Zelensky and our Turkish partners, which provided guarantees for implementation of this initiative. Thank you very much.
It is moving to be here in Odesa, and it is especially meaningful to be here on World Humanitarian Day. For months, this port was paralyzed. Ships like those here were within minutes of sailing fully loaded with grains and other cargo. These vessels were ordered back. A critical transportation line from a global breadbasket was cut. The Black Sea Grain Initiative is changing that. In less than a month, 25 ships have departed from Odesa and other Ukrainian ports, loaded with grain and other food supplies, with more on their way, as the minister has explained. They have carried well over 600,000 tons of food products and counting: wheat, corn, sunflower oil, soya beans. But each ship is also a vessel of hope. Hope for Ukrainian farmers, finally rewarded for their harvest, with storage being freed up for more. Hope for seafarers and the larger shipping community, knowing that it is once again possible to sail through the Black Sea safely and efficiently. And most of all, hope for the world's most vulnerable people and countries. Here from Odesa, on World Humanitarian Day, I want to make a special appeal to the wealthier world for those bearing the brunt of the global food crisis. As these ports open, I appeal for wealthier countries to also open their wallets and their hearts. After all, the movement of grains doesn't mean much to countries that cannot afford it. Lower prices on the global food markets don't mean much if those prices aren't reflected in local food markets. A country cannot feed itself if it is starved for resources.
Народові, особливо під час зимового періоду, і цього принципу і потрібно дотримувати.
Today Odesa is more than just a shipping center. This port is a symbol of what the world can do when we commit to work together for the common good. The Ukrainian people has been suffering so much. We have witnessed so many deaths, so many destruction, that it is legitimate to aspire for peace. But again, I repeat, peace in line with UN Charter, peace in line with international law. That is the best way to mark World Humanitarian Day and help set a course for a more just and peaceful world for all. Thank you. The International Agency of Atomic Energy is an autonomous agency that has a very clear mandate and that has a board. So it is for the IAEA to decide how and when and how to develop an inspection or a visit or a presence in Zaporizhia. What we have said is that the UN, as in the Ukraine, the UN Secretariat, as in the Ukraine, the capacity, logistic and security capacity to support the IAEA, if that is required, to move from Kyiv to Zaporizhia. But decisions in relation to these are decisions of the IAEA, naturally with the consent of the parties, and obviously with the consent of the Ukrainian government too.
Good afternoon and happy Friday to everyone. The Secretary General has recently arrived in Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, where he is set to meet with the President of Moldova, Maia Sandru. Earlier today, the Secretary General traveled to Odesa, Ukraine's main Black Sea port, where he was greeted by Oleksandr Kubrakov, the country's infrastructure minister. The Secretary General boarded the MV Kubrosli Y, a bulk carrier loading up some 10,000 metric tons of wheat. Touring the ship, he was able to witness grain filling up the ship's holding tanks. In speaking to reporters afterwards, Mr. Guterres expressed his emotion at being able to witness the loading operation. He said that in less than a month, 25 ships have departed from Odesa and other Ukrainian ports, carrying well over 600,000 metric tons of food products. As he toured the port, the Secretary General made a special appeal to the wealthier world for those bearing the brunt of the global food crisis. He said that it is time for massive and generous support so developing countries can purchase the food from Odesa and other ports and people can buy it. Tomorrow, the Secretary General will fly to Istanbul to visit the Joint Coordination Center for the Black Sea Grain Initiative. He will return to New York late tomorrow night. In a statement issued yesterday evening, the Secretary General expressed his deep concern over a series of explosions in Afghanistan that have killed and injured more than 250 people this month, including children. He strongly condemned the Wednesday attack at the Abu Bakr Mosque in Kabul city. The Secretary General extends his deepest condolences to the victims' families and wishes a swift recovery to those injured. Any acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable, regardless of their motivation, wherever, whenever, and by whomsoever committed. All Afghans have the right to live in peace and exercise their freedom of religion. In a statement yesterday, UN agencies working in the occupied Palestinian territory said that they and their partners take seriously allegations of funding terrorism and the Israeli designations of 7 Palestinian organizations as terror organizations and or unlawful. However, they add, despite offers to review the allegations to determine if funds have been diverted, Israeli authorities have not given any compelling evidence to the United Nations agencies nor its NGO partners working in the occupied Palestinian territory to support these designation nations. The attempted closures of these organizations' offices represents the latest in a series of actions by Israel that are further limiting the ability of human rights, humanitarian, and development work in the occupied Palestinian territory, which affects all institutions working to promote human rights, development, and delivering assistance. The UN agencies urge the government of Israel to refrain from any action that would prevent these organizations from continuing their critical human rights, humanitarian, and development work in the occupied Palestinian territory. In the Horn of Africa, the World Food Programme is expanding its assistance as levels of hunger soar after back-to-back droughts. Since the start of the year, 9 million more people have slipped into severe food insecurity across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, leaving 22 million people struggling to find enough food to eat. Across the Horn of Africa, the drought is expected to continue in the coming months, with a fifth poor rainy season forecast for later this year. Across the 3 drought-affected countries, WFP is targeting 8.5 million people across the Horn of Africa, up from 6.3 million at the start of the year. WFP is providing food and cash assistance to families and distributing fortified foods to women and young children to treat spiraling rates of malnutrition and prevent more people from slipping closer towards famine. WFP cash grants and insurance schemes are also helping families to buy food, to keep livestock alive, or to compensate them when their animals die. More information is available online. Staying in the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, has released $10 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to ramp up emergency aid in the country, which is looking into the abyss after its worst drought in 40 years. Catastrophic levels of food insecurity have been declared for the first time since 2017, with 213,000 people in famine-like conditions and half the population, 7.8 million people, being acutely food insecure. The drought has displaced over 1 million people in Somalia since 2021, and an estimated 1.5 million children under age 5 face acute malnutrition. Humanitarians reached over 4 million people with assistance in the first half of this year, and they continue to scale up to avert the worst, supported by the additional SURF funds. With this latest funding, the Central Emergency Response Fund has allocated a total of $41 million to the drought response in Somalia this year. In Zambia, our UN team, led by Resident Coordinator Beatrice Mutali, is bolstering efforts to support authorities to tackle multiple shocks, including the spike in the costs of living, climate change, and the pandemic impacts. On the health front, the UN Children's Fund has purchased 20 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines, nearly 250,000 test kits, 1 million sets of personal protective equipment, and 500 cold chains and solar fridges, boosting the national vaccination campaign alongside the team's communications efforts. Over half of the population is fully vaccinated. The World Health Organization has also trained over 260 health workers to manage cases in isolation centers. For its part, the World Food Programme has helped 110,000 smallholder farmers recover from droughts with training to protect degraded soil and diversify crops. We are also investing in entrepreneurship, with the International Labour Organization training over 400 small and medium companies on safety and improved operations, while the UN Development Programme helped establish a fund to boost women's access to credit and further support businesses. And in Haiti, Martin Griffiths has allocated $5 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to help meet humanitarian needs caused by gang violence in Haiti. Since July, hundreds of people have been killed in clashes between gangs in Haiti's Cité Soleil. Many others have been trapped in the fighting, cutting off their access to drinking water, food, and health care. Overall, OCHA estimates that nearly 280,000 people are affected by the situation. Funding through the UN Children's Fund and the World Food Programme will provide food, drinking water, health care, and education support to more than 100,000 people. The high level of insecurity is compromising humanitarians' access to impacted people for food or cash distributions, as well as access to basic services such as health and education for at least 1 to 1.5 million people who are trapped in gang-controlled neighborhoods. The Haiti Humanitarian Response Plan, asking for $373 million, is currently 14% funded. The World Health Organization has published today its first guideline for Ebola virus disease therapeutics, with new strong recommendations for the use of 2 monoclonal antibodies. WHO calls on the global community to increase access to these life-saving medicines. The WHO guidelines will support healthcare providers caring for patients with Ebola and policymakers involved in outbreak preparedness and response. The new guidance complements clinical care guidance that outlines the optimized supportive care Ebola patients should receive, from the relevant tests to administer, to managing pain, nutrition and co-infections, and other approaches that put the patient on the best path to recovery. More information is online. Oscar had asked me recently about Nicaragua, and I can say that the Secretary General is very concerned by the severe closure of democratic and civic space in Nicaragua and recent actions against civil society organizations, including those of the Catholic Church. Reports of a raid against the residence of the Catholic Bishop of Matagalpa only heighten these concerns. The Secretary General reiterates his call to the government of Nicaragua to ensure the protection of human rights of all citizens, particularly the universal rights of peaceful assembly and to freedoms of association, thought, conscience, and religion, and to release all people arbitrarily detained. And today is World Humanitarian Day. In a message, the Secretary General notes that far from the spotlight and out of the headlines, humanitarians work around the clock to make our world a better place. Against incredible odds and often at great personal risk, he says, they ease suffering in some of the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. The Secretary General notes that today, the number of people who need humanitarian assistance has never been higher because of conflicts, climate change, COVID-19, poverty, hunger, and unprecedented levels of displacement. On this year's World Humanitarian Day, he says, we celebrate humanitarians everywhere. We salute their dedication and courage and pay tribute to those who lost their lives in pursuit of this noble cause. They represent the best of humanity, the Secretary General adds. As part of the day, we just had a wreath-laying ceremony to remember our colleagues and friends killed and injured in the attack on the United Nations headquarters in Baghdad 19 years ago. Under-Secretary General Catherine Pollard represented the Secretary General at that event. That's it for me. Are there any questions? Yes. We'll start off with Edward. Yeah.
Hi, Farhan. I have several questions. First on Ukraine. Today, the Russian President Putin had a phone call with the French President Macron. In this phone call, he said the obstacles of those the Russian exports still remain, and he said it's not contributing to solving problems related to ensuring global food security. Just wondering, from the UN side, how's the execution of this MOU with Russia?
It's continuing, and you'll have seen what the Secretary General said, that earlier today when he was in Odesa, he did say, let's not forget that what we see here in Odesa is only the more visible part of the solution. The other part that is also important that we have been defending relate to the unimpeded access to the global markets of Russian food and fertilizer, which are not subject to sanctions. It's important that all governments and the private sector cooperate to bring them to market. And so we're proceeding with that.
And yesterday, the foreign minister of Ukraine, Kuleba, said, and I quote, the presidents and the secretary general have coordinated not only positions, but their actions on key issues, the grain corridor, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the release of our prisoners. It's not just a matter of talking, but of agreeing who does what. So what will the UN do? And does that mean the UN has allied itself with Ukraine on those issues?
No, that's certainly not the case. When it comes to our diplomatic efforts, it's important to coordinate with all the parties on the ground. So it entails coordination with Ukraine on the one side, but it does entail coordination with the Russian Federation. And as you've seen with the grain deal that also brought in Turkey, we sometimes coordinate with other parties as well. So that's what we're doing. The Secretary General has already discussed some of the things we're doing in terms of moving forward, including with the situation at Olenivka. And as you know, yesterday he named the person he intends to appoint as the head of the panel. And we'll proceed on other fronts as we can.
Okay, so one last question. One last question on Kashmir. because India has decided to allow voting rights to any Indian citizens temporarily living in the India-administered part of Kashmir, which sparked anger and fears because they fear it's another attempt of Modi's Hindu nationalist government to change the demography of that region, which is actually a Muslim majority region. So any comments from the UN on this?
Well, that would need to be studied, but the basic principle that we followed is that for any disputes, it's important to make sure that all of the communities feel that they're being fairly treated and fairly represented. Yes, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. The Ukrainians are saying that Russia apparently wants to take the nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia off the nuclear grid. Has the UN got any comment on that?
Well, the Secretary General, in fact, was asked about this in Odessa. And one of the points he made in response to the question about what should be done is he said, obviously, the electricity from Zaporizhzhia is Ukrainian electricity and it's necessary, especially during the winter for the Ukrainian people, and this principle must be fully respected.
Okay, and another Ukraine-related question. The Ukrainians asked the UN to help with both their prisoners and Ukrainians who had been taken to Russia. Those are issues that traditionally might also involve the International Committee for the Red Cross. Is the UN planning to contact the ICRC at all about these issues, or how does the Secretary General plan to move ahead on these?
Well, at this stage, this was one of the things that was discussed while the Secretary General was in Ukraine, and we'll see what can be done to take those issues forward. But you're absolutely right that when it comes to the Geneva Conventions and the issue of prisoners of war, the guarantor of the Geneva Conventions is the International Committee of the Red Cross, and so it would be important to bring them in to anything that involves prisoners of war. Yes, Kristen, and then Betul.
Thanks, Farhan. Travel ban waivers for Taliban are set to expire today. Security Council's been unable to agree on a way forward. I know it's up to them to make this call, but I'm wondering from the Secretary General's perspective, how crucial, or is it important at all? Is it needed? How beneficial has it been to have Taliban officials able to travel in order to run the country, especially given the deteriorating situation that we see there? Has there been any benefit from allowing them to travel? And if so, what? And yeah, thank you.
Well, as you know, this is something that the council members are themselves disputing. Some of the members of the council have pointed to the benefits of allowing them to go about travel for diplomatic work, including, for example, to Doha. And you'll have seen what the contribution of the process at Doha has made in terms of the wider dealings with the Taliban. At the same time, we've clearly expressed our concerns about the Taliban's own records and their failure in recent months to uphold their stated commitments to maintain the status quo on human rights, including, in particular, the rights of women and girls. And so there's a number of issues, and the different council members are weighing those, and we will leave that matter to them.
Is it possible, just to follow up, that given this was supposed to be an incentive for them to respect those rights, and it hasn't worked. Is it time to use the stick instead of the carrot, perhaps?
Yeah, I believe that's exactly the argument that some of the council members are making, and we'll see what agreement they come to. But that's why this is a lively discussion amongst them, and we'll let them conduct it. Yes, Betul?
Thanks, Farhan. I'll also follow up on Ukraine. French President Macron also said that Russian President Putin agrees to IAEA visit a nuclear plant via Ukraine. Can you tell us when this plant is planned to take place?
At this stage, there's nothing to announce. We've already made clear that we have the ability and the mechanisms that can help to bring an IAEA team via Kiev to Zaporizhia, and once the necessary agreements are ironed out, we would be prepared to do that. Okay, Iftikhar, you have a question online?
Thank you, Farhan. Although my question has been asked by a friend, Edward, but let me ask you about the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. The UN has appealed to Israel to allow the human rights organization to operate in occupied Palestinian territories. But has the United Nations followed up on that appeal and made contacts with Israel?
Yes, we continue to have our contacts on the ground with our Israeli counterparts. You have just heard what a group of the United Nations agencies operating in the occupied Palestinian territory have said, and they will also follow up with the relevant Israeli authorities. Mushfiq al-Fazl, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Farhan. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you and see you.
Yeah, thank you. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, concluded her visit to Bangladesh this week and called an independent and transparent investigation to allegation of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killing, and torture. On the eve of the rights chief's 4-day visit to Bangladesh, a Sweden-based news portal, Netro News, has revealed the location of a secret prison, Ainagar, in which the victims of enforced disappearances are kept in Bangladesh by the intelligence agency DGFR. Documentary Ainagar Bandi clearly reveals how the state organization have been making people victim of enforced disappearances and killing them. I'm wondering who will do the investigation.
Mushfiq, please, can you get to your the question part of your question?
The second part?
The question. You have a question.
Yeah. So I'm wondering who will do the investigation, as the ruling regime itself involved in this unlawful and human rights activity. Is that possible to form an independent investigation commission by the Secretary General, as opposition and rights group are asking for this?
I don't have any comment on whether there would be anything like that. At this stage, the important thing is for the authorities to investigate the matter thoroughly. And beyond that, I would just refer back to the press remarks that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, made as she concluded her trip. And if there are no further questions, I'll wish you all a great weekend.
I have a question, Farhan. Hey, Farhan, how you doing? I have a question, please.
Yeah. Okay, certainly.
Yes, Farhan.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Farhan.
And Iftikhar, Iftikhar, please mute your volume.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Is
Oscar.
the question for me or Iftikhar? Oh,
no, for you.
Yes, Farhan, just to follow up the situation in Nicaragua, and just wonder if there is any investigation on these claims on this nonsense again from the government of Daniel Ortega against the Catholic Church. And yesterday, there was a raid police against the bishop and some other members from the church. They were under house arrest, but now the police took them, and we don't know what's the situation.
Oscar, did you
in this regard?
Oscar, sorry to interrupt, but did you hear the part that I read answering your question about Nicaragua just a few minutes before we turn to questions?
I'm sorry. No, I just got connected because I was in an assignment, and I'm sorry.
All right. So, Oscar, I read this earlier before you joined, but I'll read it again for you. The Secretary General is very concerned by the severe closure of democratic and civic space in Nicaragua and recent actions against civil society organizations, including those of the Catholic Church. Reports of a raid against the residence of the Catholic Bishop of Matagalpa only heighten these concerns. The Secretary General reiterates his call to the government of Nicaragua to ensure the protection of human rights of all citizens, particularly the universal rights of peaceful assembly, and to freedoms of association, thought, conscience, and religion, and to release all people arbitrarily detained. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you so much, Farhan.
Okay, thanks. And have a great weekend, everyone.
All right, let's go ahead. Whatever's going to be brought in will be brought in to me. Hopefully. I want to start off with a note on... oh, well, there it comes.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.